Coming up, lots of screaming ghosts, albeit silent ones, why I got kicked out of a pub I used to work in for the 3rd time, and more than you ever wanted to know about the British education system.
Welcome to Rugby. I am Juliet, this is Freya, this is Sam.
Hello!
We are going to show you around the town, talk a bit about its history and about the ghosts said to haunt it. Also, fair warning, this is where we grew up and we are standing outside the venue for Sam's wedding reception.
Yeah, lovely Thai food. Unfortunately, they're not open at the moment, so we can't go in.
Otherwise, we would eat there. So, yeah, there's probably going to be a few personal anecdotes along the way as well. We're standing here, not because the Thai restaurant is haunted, but because the building across the street is apparently haunted. Our source for Rugby's ghost stories is SC Skillman's Paranormal Warwickshire. I met her last weekend, lovely lady. There's a link in the description to buy her book. Like just about every theatre in the country, for reasons we don't understand, Rugby Theatre has its share of ghosts. Let us know about any theatres you know from other countries or any theatre ghosts you may have experienced. Tell me in the comments. One of the stories told at Rugby Theatre is of a woman seen floating down the stairs. It is thought she was an usherette in former times who is still taking tickets and escorting people to their seats. Another story is that the circle is haunted by the apparition of a man who fell over the balcony and died. He loved the theatre so much he is often seen in his former seat, and people have actually got out of his way as he moved towards it. That'd be quite freaky if you realised he was a ghost. Mm-hmm. Otherwise it would just be a dude. I guess maybe he vanishes? Yeah? Let's assume that's what happens. And there's another one. People have also heard voices in the changing areas below the stage and seen shadows moving across the stage. So whether those relate to the woman that floats down the stairs or the man that sits in the seats, or whether that's another spirit altogether, who knows? Basically, actors and theatre goers are they're so keen they never ever want to leave their theatre. Ever, apparently.
From the theatre, we headed to a spot that holds a lot of happy memories for me from my teenage years. And for Sam, but she still lives there, so that's less exciting for her. Rugby's Clock Tower, built to commemorate Queen Victoria's Diamond Jubilee in 1897.
We are at the Clock Tower in Rugby Town Centre. Now, this is not very exciting to Sam, who still lives here, but this is where we used to meet up when we were teenagers. It's where we used to meet the boys. We went to a girls' school.
Yeah.
Meeting the boys, one of whom Sam is now married to, by the way, so it worked out well.
It did. All of that time and effort, well spent.
Yeah. It was very exciting. This was a very, very, very big deal. We were also old enough that we didn't get mobile phones till we were in year 13.
Yeah.
It was a big deal. As Sam lives here, she doesn't really care much, but I'm excited. I haven't been back here in ages.
I'm excited you're here.
There we go, yes.
Reliving our teenage years, a long time ago.
Yeah.
Let's not think about how long ago.
No, we don't want to go there.
Do that, yeah.
We're actually not here to reminisce about the clock tower, though. We are going to talk about the buildings over the road. These buildings, as you can see, are now your basic, I assume, 60s shops and office buildings. But they used to be the Lawrence Sherriff almshouses.
Lawrence Sherriff was a grocer from Rugby who lived about 1516 to 1567, and he provided spices and necessaries to Princess Elizabeth, later Queen Elizabeth I. Although he moved to London, he became very rich and bought a lot of property back in his hometown of Rugby. Although he was married, he doesn't seem to have had any children, and when he became ill, he drew up a will that stipulated his fortune should be used in various ways to serve the people of Rugby and Brownsover. Brownsover is a nearby village that is now a suburb of the town and is where I used to live. One of the things the money was used to build was almshouses. Almshouses, also known as poorhouses, bedhouses, or hospitals, in the sense of providing hospitality, were housing provided to people in need from a particular part of the community throughout the mid and later medieval periods and as here into the early modern period. In fact, some still exist today as subsidised housing for elderly people. Many were paid for and run by monasteries, and so were shut down and abandoned when King Henry VIII took over and destroyed England's monasteries between 1535 and 1541, when Lawrence Sherriff was in his 20s. Others were paid for by wealthy benefactors like Sherriff. The almshouses he founded in Rugby were originally houses for older men and stood until the 18th century, and then they were rebuilt and their replacements stood until the 1960s.
The almshouses were based in a 3-storey building, but then at a later time it was converted into smaller livable houses. The row of shops that now occupies the site where they were is said to be haunted. Many people have reported seeing shadows walking through walls or disappearing in front of their eyes. Other people feel like they're being watched or sense that someone else is with them when they're alone in a room, or they've heard the sound of shuffling feet. Footsteps have also been heard on the upper floors, and in the building now occupied by H. Samuels, Sam, is H. Samuels still there? In the building that was occupied by H. Samuels until presumably COVID or some other financial crisis, reports included a strange presence upstairs and feelings of being pushed and touched. Many agree that the upper rooms are much colder than the other rooms. We have now managed to remember that what's behind me is what was H. Samuels, but these are definitely the former almshouses. So either H. Samuels moved and then went, or that one's haunted as well, which is quite possible.
From the clock tower, we headed past the market to the Black Swan pub on Chapel Street, like its namesake in Stratford-upon-Avon, also known to locals as the Dirty Duck.
I am standing in front of the Black Swan pub. This is in a 14th century terrace. In the 18th and 19th centuries, the terrace properties were all one, but then walls were constructed to separate them into multiple properties later on. And the buildings, all of them, are reputed to be haunted, with several reports of figures floating through the walls. So presumably, people who lived in it or worked in it when it was all one building before it was separated into multiple buildings. Paranormal investigations have been carried out in the Black Swan pub, where the paranormal investigators heard many stories. Staff and customers describe items falling off the shelves, cold drafts or breezes, and an awareness of a little girl wandering around. There was also an apparition of a big man with a dominant manner, apparently. The paranormal investigators suggested that maybe he was an ex-landlord. Several reports refer to a dark shadow walking through the wall into what is now the Copper Tree, which is next door. Pub staff also told the investigators they didn't like to go in certain rooms. They felt very uncomfortable, as if they were being watched. Some report the sound of a woman screaming. Others complain about shadows on the floor. And S.C. Skillman has added that a serious accident did take place here in 2002 when a wall fell and a woman was killed. So it sounds like quite a mixture of possible hauntings there. Some of them 200 years old or more, and one of them much, much more recent.
We continued on up the high street, but before we managed to get to any ghosts, I got briefly distracted.
When I lived in Rugby, Amazon didn't exist because I am that old, and Hunts is how we got any book we needed that wasn't easily available from W.H. Smith's. So I'm going in and I'm buying a book. I didn't intend to spend quite that much money, but my 3-year-old is going to love this.
Having spent too much money buying a present for the toddler, I got back on track and headed back to our next haunted location.
The building behind me, which is now Yum Yum World, was Marks and Spencer when I lived here. But before that, it was the town hall for Rugby, and apparently many strange tales have emerged from this property. Reports include the sound of meetings taking place and apparitions of men in suits sitting in rows. Slightly further down the same street, this was at one point Poundland when the book was written. It was a club when I was a teenager, and it was Woolworths before that. This building and the one next to it also formed the original town hall for Rugby, and the upper floors are thought to be haunted here too. Some report seeing a grey lady who walks the upper floors and creates a feeling of unease. Now here we have the Lawrence Sherriff pub, where customers and staff often get a very cold feeling and report that the hairs on their arms stand up without apparent reason. Down in the cellar, the temperature is often exceptionally cold, and it is claimed electrical items turn on and off by themselves.
The impressive building we were slowly approaching at the end of the street is part of Rugby School. And at this point, we can no longer avoid having to give as brief as possible an explanation of the ridiculously complicated British education system. British children usually start secondary school the academic year they turn 12. We used to have some middle schools, but those are pretty rare now. It's usually straight from primary school to secondary school. British kids can choose whether to leave school aged 16 or aged 18. At 16, we take GCSEs, which are like the owls in the Harry Potter universe. These are our basic school leaver exams, and the name stands for General Certificate of Secondary Education. Some people go out into work straight away, but most will do another type of qualification. Some of these are on-the-job training, like modern apprenticeships. You can get NVQs, which stands for National Vocational Qualifications, which are work-based qualifications. Or, of course, you can join the armed forces. But many will stay in full-time education until the age of 18 and take another set of exams at 18 called A-levels. These are the equivalent of the newts in Harry Potter. There's also an extra set of exams you take in between the two aged 17 called AS levels. Some schools only cover years 7 to 11, that is, up to the GCSEs. Students from those schools have to go somewhere else if they want to do A-levels. Some schools have what's called a sixth form. That means you can stay at that school from year 7 all the way through to year 13 and study for your A-levels there. The name comes from when it used to be first, second, third, fourth, etc. form. Or students leaving after their GCSEs can go to a college to do their A-levels. This is not university-level teaching. It doesn't mean the same as college in America, nor does it have anything to do with Oxford and Cambridge colleges, which is something else entirely. It's a place that teaches sixth form only and might allow students to do NVQs as well as or instead of A-levels. There are a few different types of secondary school in addition to the sixth form colleges. Your basic normal state school is called a comprehensive, and these are what most people will go to. Some have sixth forms, some don't. Some are called academies and are run by an academy trust and don't have to follow the national curriculum, which dictates what topics students should learn about when in state schools in the UK. Sam and I, being weirdos, went to a grammar school. These were originally set up to help poor kids gain access to education, and they are free to go to. But you have to pass an entrance exam to get in. So back in the day, the only way to get to a secondary school was to pay, unless you could pass the entrance exam to get into the grammar school. Now, obviously, we have compulsory state education, so they are not needed in the same way. They're fairly rare these days, and they are usually split into a girls' school and a boys' school, which are often connected with each other and share some resources, but are separate schools. Then there are your basic normal private schools. You have to pay fees to go to them, and they don't have to follow the national curriculum. They're fairly straightforward. Then there are public schools. This is the most confusing bit of all, because these are not state schools. They are the very poshest and most expensive of the private schools. You have to pay large fees to go to them. The name public school is a hangover from the 19th century. They are open to anyone with enough money to pay. They're not restricted to a specific area or profession. That's what makes them public. Exactly which schools count as public schools depends on who you ask, but there are 7 core public schools and no more than about a dozen, however you count it. They include Eton, Harrow, Westminster, and Rugby. Rugby School was founded with the money from Lawrence Sherriff's will. Ironically, it was originally a boys' grammar school, located opposite St Andrew's Church in the town centre. But it started charging fees in the mid-18th century, and by the 19th century it was one of the most prestigious schools in the country, made famous by the novel Tom Brown's School Days, which was set there. The current buildings date back to the 19th century. The school first admitted some girls in the 1970s and became co-educational in 1992. Meanwhile, Lawrence Sherriff's legacy was revived when a new free boys' grammar school was founded in 1878 and named after him. We went to the connected girls' grammar school Rugby High School, not Rugby School, very important, which was founded on the outskirts of town in 1903. Being such a fancy and prestigious school, Rugby School has a lot of very famous old boys, and we were on our way to the statue of one of them that was unveiled not long before I first moved to the town in the 90s.
This is the statue of William Webb Ellis. If you have been wondering whether rugby is named after the sport or the sport is named after the town, the answer is it is named after the town. The sport was invented, air quotes, by William Webb Ellis here,
This chap?
a pupil at Rugby School, by cheating at football.
Yeah, he and his mates were losing against the younger year group, and they decided that this wasn't working for them, so he picked up the ball and ran with it, which to me sounds like every kid ever who was losing a game of football. But because they were older and came from money, they turned it into a whole new game.
This is why and how the British invent sports. We cheat, rich British people cheat, and then just say, oh, I wasn't cheating, I invented a new game.
It was a new rule. We've added a new rule.
This, my friends, is privilege.
We took Freya for a walk around the outside of the Rugby School buildings, which take up quite a bit of this part of town, and we did some reminiscing about our own school days as we went.
Sam and I have actually spent the night in Rugby School because our friend's dad worked there, and we had a sleepover in the library once. We didn't see any ghosts.
No.
Sam doesn't believe in them anyway.
I don't, and also, to be fair, we were very, very noisy. I'm not sure, even if a ghost was around, would we have noticed?
No, we were playing chariot racing on the wheeled chairs.
No, we weren't. We'd never do anything like that in the library.
No, we respect libraries. We love libraries. Anyway, a set of buildings as old as Rugby School must be haunted. So if you know of any ghost stories associated with Rugby School, please let us know in the comments.
It was time to head back into town to one of the oldest buildings in Rugby, St Andrew's Church, which stands right in the middle of the busiest part of the town.
Here we are at Rugby's 14th century church, St Andrews. Strange experiences have been reported in the graveyard and adjacent gardens. Some claim to see shadows or hear voices and screams. The area behind the church dates back to 1130, to the reign of King Stephen. Some walkers in the gardens say they have heard whispering and noises. This is possibly because it was at one point used as a plague pit. This was in 1634. There was a very high death toll from plague in Rugby, and many people were buried in a large pit in St Andrew's graveyard.
I did not know that.
I did not know that either.
We took Freya for a walk past the gardens and around the back to the cemetery, listening out for screaming ghosts the whole time, but we didn't hear any.
This is the graveyard, and this is where we took the wedding photos on Sam's wedding day. But we didn't hear any screaming.
From the cemetery, we turned back towards our final stop, intending to finish off our tour in Castle Street and then stop for a drink at one of the pubs I used to work at, the local Wetherspoons. It's named the Rupert Brook after one of Britain's best-known First World War poets and another famous old boy of Rugby School. But we ran into a couple of problems.
So behind us, and home to a very noisy building site, is Castle Street, site of a very sad story where a man killed his daughter in a fit of rage and was a couple of days later arrested and charged with her murder, judged insane and sentenced to life imprisonment. And passers-by have reported strange experiences in Castle Street, where he lived with his wife, and she lived with him and her mother. They claim to hear wailing and screams from the wife and see shadows in the windows, usually around 7 or 8 in the morning, which was the time of the murder. I am glad to say it's 2 o'clock in the afternoon. Yeah, all we can see is the building site. We were going to finish off in the Wetherspoons, but I have just been kicked out of that Wetherspoons for the 3rd time in my life.
But this time it was the dog's fault.
Yes, the first time was a case of mistaken identity. Then I worked there for about 3 months when I was 18. Then I got kicked out. Well, I didn't get kicked out. One of our friends got kicked out for not having ID when she was 26 and hadn't thought to bring ID to prove she was 18. So we all left in solidarity. And now I've just been kicked out because they don't allow dogs even in the beer garden.
Sorry,
never mind, we can't finish with a drink at the pub, but we hope you've enjoyed this tour of our hometown, which is still Sam's hometown.
It is still my hometown.
If you enjoyed this video, please like, subscribe to my channel for myth, legend, folklore, ghost stories, weird and wonderful history in general, and we'll have a quick goodbye from Freya. Freya, say bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you for watching. Bye.
Bye.